They detained him without evidence, expedited his process, and set his bail at $10,000, until a single telephone call completely altered the situation. It was late summer, and the air was dense with heat as Jamal Reynolds emerged from his residence. The sun's pressure was comparable to that of an iron. He had a single objective: collect a bottle of Gatorade from Jim's Corner Mart, and return home before his mother called to inquire about his whereabouts. He had a maximum of 10 minutes. Particularly in this community, Jamal was not inclined to spend time outdoors, not due to the peril, but rather because individuals observed him in a manner that differed from that of his peers at Rockford High School. The experience of being a 16-year-old black child in a predominantly white suburb was akin to crossing a precarious line. He was aware of the regulations: refrain from running, do not loiter, and keep your hands visible. Don't provide them with an excuse. The corner store's chilly surge of air conditioning greeted him with a sense of relief as he entered. The place was compact, crowded with cases of sodas and snacks, and had an odor reminiscent of stale coffee. The proprietor, Mr. Jim, scarcely glanced up from his newspaper. Standing in close proximity to the counter, a white individual in a polo shirt scanned the aisles with a tense mandible. Jamal proceeded to the beverages section, where he collected a blue Gatorade from the refrigerator, and proceeded to the cash register. His attention was drawn to a man in a black hoodie who was shoving confectionery bars into his pockets as he passed the snack aisle. He moved quickly, his gaze flashing toward the front. Before the individual in the hoodie fled, Jamal had scarcely had the opportunity to assimilate the information. Before the store alarm sounded, the electronic chime of the door flinging open had scarcely concluded. Jamal experienced a state of freeze. Swearing, Mr. Jim leaped to his feet. After spinning toward the entrance, the individual at the counter swiftly focused on Jamal. The individual, stepping forward, called out, "You." Jamal experienced an audible tremor. Confused, he turned, but the individual was already in his designated area, with a hand firmly grasping his arm. Jamal suddenly pulled back, yelling, "Let me go." Remain seated. He removed a pair of shackles from his waistband. Jamal observed the insignia attached to his waistband at that moment. Police officer, who is not currently on assignment. He felt a sudden shudder of recognition. That was not me. The individual fled in that direction. While seeking assistance, Jamal glanced at Mr. Jim. The owner hesitated, his eyebrows furrowed, but he did not speak. Jamal's pulse was pounding. No, this was not occurring. This couldn't possibly be occurring. Unfortunately, the officer was not paying attention. Twisting his limbs behind his back, he shoved Jamal against the counter. "You believe you are sophisticated," the officer murmured. "I did not take any action." Make a click. The shackles around his wrists snapped with a frigid sensation. A number of customers observed, with some murmuring, and others reaching for their smartphones. However, no one intervened. The sound of a siren could be heard in the distance. Jamal's extremities became immobilized. He was aware that this was a negative matter, awful. In an instant, a bottle of Gatorade transformed into a future that was beyond his control, complete with blinding lights, restraints, and imprisonment. Conversely, the most detrimental aspect is, there was no interest in hearing his perspective on the matter. I found the journey to the station to be lengthier than it should have been. In the rear seat, Jamal sat rigidly, his wrists aching from the tight cuffs, and his pulse thundering like a drum in his chest. The officer operating the vehicle had not offered any commentary subsequent to closing the door. Rather, they had communicated via radio. A juvenile suspect is currently in custody, and he maintained his gaze on the road. In an effort to compel him to pay attention, Jamal desired to shriek. However, something told him that it would not be a significant issue. The station was a grey, windowless structure that emanated an odor of old paper and sweat. As Jamal entered the building, a uniformed officer propelled him forward, guiding him past rows of workstations and booming phones. He was led to a detention area by his footwear, which squeaked against the linoleum. Looked up from a clipboard, a tall, broad-shouldered officer with an insignia that read Sergeant Miller. Before emitting a groan, he scarcely glanced at Jamal. Miller, as a result of his boredom, murmured, "Shoplifting." The officer who made the arrest, Detective Carl Brewer, acknowledged, "I procured him at Jim's Corner Mart." While the owner was not present to witness the incident, He was the sole individual in close proximity to the shelf when the alarm raised. Jamal's body tensed. That is incorrect. At that time, I was. The force with which Brewer compressed his shoulder was sufficient to silence him. What is the footage from the camera? Miller inquired. I have not yet verified this, but Brewer simply shrugged. The child coincides with the description. The contents of Jamal's stomach were rapidly turning. Description. He had been attired entirely in black, including a parka. Standing in this location, Jamal was dressed in basketball shorts and a grey t-shirt. It did not matter. Miller's reaction was extremely minimal. He merely wrote something down, and made a nod toward an open doorway. Please transport him to the processing facility. Jamal repeated the attempt, his voice trembling but remaining resolute. No, I did not pilfer anything. Perform an inspection of the cameras. Consult Mr. Jim. Brewer neglected him. However, he dragged Jamal toward a small room, where an officer with a camera was awaiting. Concealed weapons. Then, DNA. He was then required to sign a form with his palms trembling, the words juvenile, detention pending arraignment, glaring back at him. There was a sensation in Jamal's body that it was not his own, as if he were witnessing this occur to someone else. In the end, they escorted him to a frigid metal bench, replaced the shackles with zip ties, and left him there. The reception area was simply a room with a few other children sprawled against the walls, all of whom appeared to be equally bewildered. It was not a cell. Minutes elapsed, and then an hour. The apprehension permeated him more deeply as he continued to sit. Does his mother even know his whereabouts? All week, she had been working late. What would happen if she dialed his phone number, and it immediately went to voicemail? Is it possible that she believed he was simply socializing with his friends? Doors creaked as they opened. Jamal's head snapped up as a public defender in a wrinkled suit stepped in. The individual appeared to be approximately 30 years old, with a lack of interest and a fatigued appearance. Jamal Reynolds, he inquired, perusing the documents. Jamal's larynx became dried up. Answer yes. As he sat down, the attorney tapped his pen against the folder. Shoplifting and resisting arrest have been filed against you. Jamal's torso felt constricted. That is not. I am present to represent you at the arraignment, the lawyer interrupted, already transitioning to the next matter. The first thing you hear in the morning is something you hear. How is your morning? The individual was being held overnight. Panic clawed at his ribcage. I did not do anything, he repeated, this time proceeding more quietly. The attorney let out a slight exhalation. That is one of the things that they all say, child. The heart thudded cruelly against his ribs as Jamal sat silently. This was the first time that it truly struck him. This was more than a mere misunderstanding. They were unwilling to adhere to the request. His burial was imminent. However, tomorrow, everything would undergo a transformation. It was simply not yet apparent to them. Jamal appeared to have experienced a shortage of sleep. The hard plastic bench in the holding area had caused his back to ache, and upon closing his eyes, the actuality of the situation would once again tumble down. By morning, an officer called his name and unlocked the door. Follow me, Reynolds. There was a flurry of heavy doors and reverberating footfall as the individual made their way to the courtroom. His wrists were once more secured with zip ties, which were sufficiently tight that his digits were rendered numb. He was still unaware of the individual's name, and his attorney was walking beside him, perusing his notes as if he were finishing up on the case at the last minute. The midriff of Jamal contorted. The television had provided him with an abundance of courtroom scenes. This was not a form of entertainment. He lived in this manner. Inside, the atmosphere was stagnant. A few dispersed individuals sat with apathetic expressions, while rows of wooden benches lined the room. At the forefront, the judge's bench was as tall as a throne. And then there was him, Judge Warren Kincaid. The counsel for Jamal had expressed his identity in a manner that suggested great significance, much like it was unfavorable news. The reason for this was now apparent to Jamal, as he stood there and gazed up at him. Kincaid was a white man of advanced age, with slender lips and razor-sharp eyes that did not yield, even in periods of benevolence. He sat with his robe precisely pressed, and his gavel was reclining on the bench as if it had already reached a decision. A forceful intake was executed by Jamal. In an overly tight suit, the prosecutor, a young man, shifted his documents and cleared his throat. Your Honor, the defendant was apprehended at the scene of a shoplifting incident. The alarm was triggered by the store owner, and Detective Carl Brewer, the arresting officer, observed him attempting to flee. Jamal's head snapped up. "That is untrue. However, I did not." His counsel firmly grasped his arm and whispered, "Do not speak unless I instruct you to." Jamal experienced an increase in physical tension in his thorax. He received scarcely any attention from the magistrate. "Is there video evidence available for the prosecution?" The surveillance footage exists. However, it has not yet been examined. Slowly, Kincaid nodded. "Subsequently, we shall proceed without it." Suddenly, Jamal's respiration became labored. In the absence of it, "Starting with Your Honor," his attorney adjusted his tie. "I propose that we postpone the meeting until we have the opportunity to review the footage." He was abruptly interrupted by Kincaid's outstretched hand. Mr. Reynolds was observed in the vicinity and resisted arrest. The authorities had probable cause to suspect that he was culpable. "We possess an abundance of information to proceed." Jamal experienced a noticeable weakness in his extremities. Everything was transpiring at an excessive pace. This was followed by the portion that caused his epidermis to become frigid. Towards the front, the prosecutor leaned. "Due to the defendant's age, we are advocating for his trial as an adult." Jamal experienced an audible tremor. The counsel representing him hesitated. "Your Honor, my client is 16 years old and has no prior criminal history." A charge of this nature. Mr. Kincaid was already shaking his head. "We must convey a message. In my courtroom, these offenses are not tolerated." The sensation of numbness in his palms was sensed by Jamal. Adult court. Real penitentiary time was the consequence of this. That meant that he would have a felony record that would not be expunged upon reaching the age of 18. This couldn't possibly be occurring. Turning, he searched the room in anticipation of spotting his mother. No, she was not. In that instant, Jamal experienced a genuine, utter sense of isolation. But then his attorney murmured, "Do you have any relatives that you need to contact?" The lips of Jamal separated. Oh, none of them were aware. Jamal experienced sensations of dryness in his pharynx. He was eager to shout, to instruct them to record the footage, and to request that anyone listen. However, the system advanced at a pace that could not be matched by his words. Each time he opened his mouth, the fingertips of Judge Kincaid were drumming against the bench as he leaned forward. "Mr. Reynolds, you are facing charges of larceny and resisting arrest. In light of the circumstances, I am inclined to concur with the prosecution's recommendation." The midriff of Jamal contorted. His attorney raised his hand absent-mindedly. "Your Honor, we respectfully request that you grant us permission to be released under the supervision of our parents, while we formulate an appropriate defense." However, the judge's response was minimal, as if Jamal were not a person at all, but rather merely an additional case file that needed to be processed. Kincaid stated coldly, surveying the courtroom, "I do not observe a parent. That is all the information I require." Jamal's heart was pounding. No, she was unaware. His mother was unaware of the situation. In an instance, she would have arrived. However, she was currently unaware of his absence. His counsel cleared his voice. "My client is a minor. We cannot presume negligence." He was abruptly interrupted by Kincaid's outstretched hand. "I will grant a public defender's request for a preliminary bail hearing. However, I am not inclined to be lenient." His eyes became fortified. "This is not the first instance in which a young man has appeared before me and asserted his innocence." Jamal experienced an increase in physical tension in his thorax. The decision of this individual had been previously determined. What he said was irrelevant. It did not matter at all what was accurate. Already, this jurist had determined his future. With a fleeting glimpse, the prosecutor examined his notes. "Your Honor, in light of the defendant's resistance during the arrest and the gravity of the offense, we respectfully ask that bail be established at $10,000. The breath of Jamal was captured. $1,000 for a bottle of Gatorade. There was minimal response from his attorney. "That is an excessive amount." There was no blinking from Kincaid. "The bail has been established at $10,000. The subsequent case will be addressed." Jamal's extremities became immobilized. "It has been completed." Exact same. It was a final and unforgiving thud of a gavel. The officer in behind him seized his arm and dragged him toward the exit. His attorney exhaled, already transitioning to his subsequent case. Jamal was incapable of drawing air, mentally incapable. As he was led through the side door,
and back toward the holding area by the officer. His vision became distorted. Indeed, this was it. He was directed to depart, unless she came to know. The officer, who was seizing his arm, caught his attention. He spoke with a clear but gruff voice. "Is it permissible for me to contact my mother?" The officer did not even glance at him.
"When we return, you will receive a single telephone call." A forceful intake was executed by Jamal. His subsequent statements were measured and deliberate. "She is the Attorney General of the United States." The officer relaxed his grasp. The words assailed the room with the force of a gunshot. Mid-signature, the prosecutor's pen abruptly ceased. Suddenly, his attorney's head snapped up. The expression of Judge Kincaid remained unchanged. However, his fingers tightened the bench slightly. And with that, everything changed. In an instant, Jamal's remarks were met with silence. Additionally, the object is large. His arresting officer, Detective Brewer, gazed at him as if he had misheard. The officer's grasp completely relaxed as he released his arm. Public defenders falter. "Excuse me, what is the matter?" Before Jamal could observe it, he experienced the transformation. But there was something peculiar about the way his mandible was fixed. Judge Kincaid did not budge. A brief glimpse of tension that had not previously existed. Holding his footing, Jamal forced himself to swallow forcefully. "The United States Attorney General is my mother." However, the prosecutor hesitated. "And her name is—" The lips of Jamal curved into a humorless smile. Right now they were in a state of panic. Angela Reynolds. It was a name that held significance. It meant authority. Oversight was the intention. In a room filled with individuals who were confident in their ability to demolish him without repercussions, it meant trouble. Immediately, the whispering commenced. Glancing at the magistrate, a court attendant shifted uncomfortably. The bailiff, who had previously given Jamal minimal attention, abruptly concentrated on him, as if he were witnessing him for the first time. His larynx was cleared by the prosecutor. "Your Honor, in light of this new information, it is possible that we should re-evaluate the terms of bail." At first, Kincaid refrained from undertaking any action. Taps were made on the desk by his fingertips. Only once, 2 times. Prior to his final exhalation, he leaned forward. "You anticipate that I will accept your claim that you are the son of the U.S. Attorney General." Jamal maintained an unwavering composure. "I anticipate that you will permit me to conduct my telephone conversation." A longer period of silence. Kincaid abruptly directed the officer, "Then transfer him to the holding area. We will verify his assertions. If they are untrue, we will proceed as scheduled." The officer again grasped Jamal's arm, but this time with considerably less assurance. Jamal's heart pounded, but it was of no consequence, simply because he was not fabricating the truth, and everything would undergo a transformation once that call was completed. Some 20 minutes later, with his hands resting on his lap, Jamal sat in a windowless holding chamber. His fingertips continued to tingle from the way the zip ties had cut into his wrists, but he scarcely noticed. The officer who had been so anxious to move him through the system, now sat across from him, with a phone pressed to his ear, nodding excessively, and too rapidly. "I understand, madam. Certainly, he is unharmed." "You are correct, Your Honor. Remains in the building. I will inform them." A measure of silence. After a moment, the officer gradually lowered the phone and glanced upward. Jamal maintained his gaze. The officer stated with a rigid upper lip, "She is en route." All Jamal did was assent. The courthouse was in a state of flux outside the chamber. There was a shift in the tone of the conversations. Calls were being placed. The realization had caused a subtle vibration of panic to spread throughout the building. They had just railroaded the incorrect child, and in the center of it all, Judge Kincaid sat behind his bench. Still, his fingertips curved against the timber. The muscles in his mandible were tense, and for the first time, he was the one who stood to lose. Echoing throughout the courthouse was the sound of heels tapping against the marble floor. It was remarkably acute, resolute, cut through the uneasy silence like a blade. He was aware of her arrival without having to see her. His mother had arrived. The officer who had received the call made a slight adjustment to his posture. People peered between each other, uncertain of what to do, as the courtroom doors, which had opened effortlessly for Kincaid's hasty verdict, now felt like barriers. And then, Angela Reynolds entered. In his lifetime, Jamal had never been so relieved to see her. Now she was more than just his mother. Wrapped in a navy blue power suit, she was a thunderstorm. Additionally, she was fuming. First her gaze was fixed on him, a cursory examination, evaluating his circumstances, and verifying his well-being. Judge Kincaid was her next destination. Kincaid declined to rise, did not recognize her authority in the room. But the manner in which his palms curled on the desk, Jamal's jaws contraction, conveyed all the information he required. The voice of Angela was composed, concise, and razor-sharp, capable of shattering glass. She initiated the conversation with, "I am curious. The reasons my son was denied due process." Not a single individual spoke. Through his nasal passage, Kincaid exhaled. "Attorney General Reynolds, Mrs. Reynolds." Pause. Jamal nearly desired to smirk. Kincaid leant forward, his expression being trained. The individual in question was apprehended for a substantial reason. He was described accurately and resisted detention. "The store is equipped with surveillance cameras," Angela declared, interrupting him, with the same ease with which a prosecutor disassembles a feeble case. "Have you reviewed them prior to establishing bail at $10,000? Remain silent." The prosecutor was briefly observed by Angela. "Answer. Did you?" The young lawyer's weight was shifting, as he sputtered. The footage had not been reviewed at the time of the arraignment. The expression of Angela remained unchanged. However, her eyes became more acute. "I understand. My son, a minor, was detained without proper evidence, denied access to his legal guardian, and compelled to navigate a legal system that prioritized action over verification." The desk was rumbled by Kincaid's fingertips. The officer who made the arrest had probable cause to suspect. She approached with a lowered voice. "I have examined your previous rulings, Your Honor. You exhibit a consistent pattern." Kincaid's visage received a brief momentary glimpse of something. "I am not surprised, but acknowledgement." He understood the implications of her statement, and so did every individual in that room. Angela turned toward the bailiff. "I require access to my son's release paperwork immediately. By the following morning, I would like to have all documentation related to this case extracted and delivered to my office." However, the magistrate did not hesitate. The same officers who had previously regarded him as a criminal now frantically attempted to rectify their error. As Jamal observed, his awareness of the transformation was palpable. Euphoria, and they were aware that they had made a mistake. Although Judge Kincaid's expression became more somber, he refrained from uttering any words. Because what could he possibly say? Powerless. Jamal entered this chamber. He now walked out unimpeded. And Kincaid, he was currently the subject of inspection. Jamal had never realized that the release process could proceed at such a rapid pace. The officers who had previously disregarded him were now racing to rectify the documentation, avoiding eye contact as if he were a radioactive threat. There was scarcely a syllable spoken by him, since what was there to say? They expressed no regret. The sole emotion they experienced was fear. As he emerged from the building, the sky had transitioned to the early evening. A respite in the humidity has finally been achieved. Mainly vacant were the steps of the courthouse. There is only one individual who is currently awaiting at the bottom. She is his mother. Watching as he approached her, Angela Reynolds stood with her arms crossed. Her expression was devoid of any resentment toward him. Rather, it was characterized by the same unyielding, ferocious concentration that she displayed whenever she encountered a grave injustice. He arrived at her, and she exhaled slowly and lengthily. "Are you feeling all right?" Jamal nodded. "Certainly." His temper, however, did not resemble his own. For a brief moment, she observed him, as if she could perceive every hour of terror, and every second of helplessness he had experienced within those walls. She then placed a hand on his shoulder, and applied pressure. She whispered, "I require your attentiveness when I express this. No, this was never about you. This was about their perception of your identity." Suddenly, Jamal turned his gaze away. That was already known to him. Looking back at the courthouse, his mother sighed. Judge Kincaid has been engaging in this behavior for an extended period of time. He has been rushing cases,
and issuing severe sentences to children who resemble you, while others are able to walk free for far worse offenses. The midriff of Jamal contorted, and nobody intervened. Darkness enveloped Angela's countenance. Several individuals attempted to do so, however, none possessed the necessary authority to cause harm. Jamal allowed that to penetrate his consciousness. Today they attempted to bury him without much hesitation. Had his mother been any other individual, in the event that he had been any other individual, he would be trapped in a system that was designed to damage him. A leisurely inhalation was taken by Angela. Jamal, that is the purpose of my actions. Not due to my desire for power, but I am aware of the individuals they employ it against. Jamal had an internal sensation of change. Why? Because she was correct. They were only afraid of the individuals who were watching today, which is why they ceased. In the future, it is possible that no one will be present to observe. His mother squeezed his shoulder one final time before guiding him toward the car. He looked back at the courthouse steps as he climbed in, at the location where he had been attempted to be erased in single afternoon. Today is not the day. No, never again. Yet the genuine inquiry was how many additional lives had been lost up to that point. A few individuals are fortunate. In fact, Jamal did. However, an inordinate number of individuals failed to do so. No, this is not a single narrative. It has become a reality. A system that determines innocence based on one's own identity. This is not what you did. An arrangement that assumes that no individual is sufficiently potent to resist. Warren Kincaid, the judge. That day, he lost more than one case. Within weeks, his courtroom was put under federal scrutiny. Re-examination of the cases were conducted. When the system that had safeguarded him was no longer expedient, it turned on him. It is only power that submits to power. Additionally, when an appropriate audience is present, the entire game undergoes a transformation. However, what is the genuine conflict? Ensuring that the subsequent Jamal is not isolated in that courtroom is important. In the event that you are of the opinion that narratives such as this be conveyed, ensure that you subscribe. This is due to the fact that the more eyes are on the truth, it becomes increasingly difficult for injustice to conceal itself.